Welcome back to Talk of the Town on 99.7, 1450 WHTC and WHTC.com.
We welcome you back to Talk of the Town for this Friday, February 5th. I'm Gary Stevens. First Friday of the month, we get caught up on what is going on with the Community Foundation of the Holland, Zeeland area. And its president, Mike Goorhouse, on the other side of our Zoom connection. Mike, good morning and welcome back to Talk of the Town.
Morning, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Glad you are with us. And if you out there, I would like to, well, I don't want to say you out there. You listeners want to join in the conversation. Mike will be happy to join us at 395-1450, 395-1450. Mike, let's begin by prefacing what I'm going to say with this, or what you're going to be saying with this. In February, early February of 2020, the Community Foundation had certain things they wanted to have done. You had sort of an idea of what you wanted to do on February 5th, 2020. By April 5th, 2020, all that changed. If you can take a look back to 2020, I would say COVID-19 is the overarching thing that the foundation had to deal with, but there were other things as well. If you can recap the year, I don't know whether or not 22 minutes is enough to recap the year, Mike, but certainly the foundation did a lot in 2020 besides just COVID-19 help.
Sure. Yeah, no, it was a important year for the foundation to live into our mission. I think people that are familiar with the Community Foundation know that the primary reason we exist is to ensure that there are always resources to respond to the unknown needs of the future. And we do that through managing a permanent community endowment. And we've been around for over 70 years, building and managing that endowment for such a time as this. I mean, the whole theory is you don't know what the future holds, but you can prepare for it. And we activated those resources for all those folks that have given over all those 70 years. We put them to work really quickly. They're flexible resources, so we can activate them fast. They can also pivot to whatever the needs are. And some good examples of that are, who would have guessed that part of our world in 2020 was to figure out how to help students learn virtually? I mean, there was no game plan for that. There was no nonprofit out there doing that work or anything like that. But that's what we needed. We needed kids to continue to learn, and so we needed to support innovative and creative ways for kids to be able to learn in a new environment, in a virtual environment. Second, you think about typically when you have economic challenges, job losses, when you even look back to 2008, 2009, people remember the stock market crashed fast, but job losses took 12 months to roll out. It was a scary time. Like every month or so, a company would announce another 100 layoffs or 50 layoffs or 200 layoffs. So it took almost a year for those layoffs to happen, and then took many more years for them to come back. We had a more unique environment this year. We had an environment where everyone was furloughed immediately. I mean, immediately. So, and then there was some knowledge about when people would come back, but not for sure. We didn't know, was it permanent furloughs or not? So the response looked different. How we came alongside families to help them access food, help them just have financial resources to get by, was a different frame than it was in other economic downturns. So again, the foundation had to put resources. So we launched a direct cash assistance program. $600,000, about a sixth of that from our money and $500,000 from a third-party donor. That was $500 cash infusions into people's bank accounts, so they could do whatever they needed to get through. That's a different approach because we had a different issue that we were dealing with. You also had a third one is mental health was already an issue in our community going the wrong direction. But I don't know a person out there who 2020 hasn't been one of their most anxious years of their lives, because there was things changing fast. There was new information that people were telling you what to do and you couldn't do. You were isolated. You couldn't have human contact. And so we needed to find ways to provide mental health resources. But let's also remember, in an environment where for half the year you couldn't see people kind of one-on-one, face-to-face. And so you had to find these different ways to reach out to communities and provide mental health resources. So for us, it was a year where it was one about activating the resources that we had meaningfully, and we did. We gave more than we've ever given before, millions of dollars that we distributed to nonprofits to do work in our community. But you also had to think differently about how you do that. You had to think about different types of programs, different types of outreach, and eventually when we kind of go back to the tried and true stuff, absolutely, right? But that's not what 2020 needed. And as a side note for those that know the foundation, we also had to ditch our processes. So our normal process is like these months-long things where we go back and forth with the nonprofit. They submit a proposal, and then we review it, and then we ask questions, and we interview people, and all these things. There was no time for that. There was no time to do all that. We'd have missed the whole moment if we'd have taken months to get things out. So we had to have a different kind of process, which was good. And I think that, to me, if I could sum up, because you're right, it would take us so long to kind of go through everything. If I could sum up the foundation's value to the community in 2020, it was having a permanent endowment with resources to respond. It was being flexible in how we distribute those resources. And it was being very thoughtful about supporting things that were maybe different and new to respond to a different type of need in our community than we had before. Those three things, I think, were key to our ability to help the community navigate this last year.
395-1450 if you have a question for Mike Goorhouse. He's the president of the Community Foundation of the Holland Zeeland area. You mentioned resources that the foundation was able to provide for the community in 2020. It's one thing when it's in an emergency situation, the immediacy of the moment. Yes, we got the resources. Let's do this. But we're talking in 2021. It's been a few months now. How are the resources right now? Can the foundation still be as nimble as possible? Or because of what was necessary, maybe the resources right now are a little on the lower side or lower than you would like to have?
Sure. Yeah, so no, in full transparency, we swung big in 2020. So we have less money to spend in 2021. And some of that was due to how big we swung in 2020. And also we had some very generous folks come alongside us in 2020. So we had some local philanthropists, some companies, individuals who said, hey, the foundation knows what's going on right now. They're every day, they're knee deep in what new federal resources are out there, what state resources, what are nonprofits doing, which nonprofits are stepping up and delivering, which ones aren't. And so they combined their resources with ours and said, for 2020, you guys give away our resources because you'll do it well. And we don't have that in 2021 either. So we do have less resources. Do we have no resources? No, we still have, we'll probably still give out probably $750,000, $800,000 or so in 2021, even in addition to what we did in 2020. And we're in the process of working through that right now. So there, as we all know, there are continued challenges, and so we are focusing. Mental health will be a lagging thing. This will continue for a while. Education is still a big one. So just because we're starting to have more kids in school doesn't mean that we have made up for the learning loss that has happened in the last year. And so thinking about creative ways to support access to learning with summer school and other kinds of programs to help folks catch up will be a big deal. And then on the financial stability side, a lot of our response is going to depend on the federal and state resources. So that was one thing I wanted to mention to your listeners, Gary. It's interesting. I think we see these big eye-popping numbers come from the CARES Act, back in the spring, and this kind of CARES 2.0, which is, another whatever, $1 billion or $1 trillion and these big numbers. But what's interesting for people is to then think about what that translates down into for our community. So those dollars, they go to places, and they go to places like the Holland Zeeland area. They make their way. And so I just thought it'd be neat to kind of highlight for folks a little bit of how those resources are making their way into our community, so that you can kind of then see, hey, when we think about philanthropy, our philanthropic response needs to be in complement to this federal response. So a couple examples. The latest CARES Act, this latest one, put a significant amount of money into what was called the eviction diversion program. It was rental assistance. It was rental assistance for people who had a 7-day eviction notice, so were close to losing their home or the place that they live. And so in the 2020, locally, Good Samaritan Ministries had about $1.5 million to spend on that, which was huge, a huge amount of money that was very, very helpful. Well, it is looking like they may get 4 or 5 times that amount in 2021 for a similar program. So as an example, that will go a long ways to help a lot of people in our community. So the foundation would say, hey, there's still work that needs to be done to support them in order to do that work well, but it's a big chunk of money that our community would not have had without these federal resources, specifically for rental assistance and eviction diversion. Another example is at our schools. So the formula, this latest CARES Act had significant money for schools, and it was being allocated down through the state into local districts based on a formula that has a lot of calculations, but includes a lot of Title I guidelines. So basically, the school districts that have the highest percentage of kids on free and reduced lunch. So our lowest income districts. And so in our case, the latest numbers I've seen, Holland Public Schools stands to get about $1,000 per student from this recent federal CARES bill. West Ottawa, about $650 a student. And so if you kind of do the numbers there, that's in Holland's case, it's about just over 3 million. In West Ottawa's case, just over 4 million in resources that they wouldn't have to be able to help students navigate this next 1 to 2 years. I think they have 2 years to spend it. So that's an example where our schools will benefit and our local students will benefit from these resources that were passed. I'll also mention another important one is childcare subsidies. So there's these subsidies that go to help keep childcare providers open, particularly when the schools are in a virtual learning mode. That's very, very helpful for folks that don't have a place for kids to be during the day, need to get to a job. And so that's only possible because of these federal dollars. And then certainly we've all heard about the local business support that's coming from these federal dollars. This PPP program, the employee retention tax credit, which has been enhanced in some new ways. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of dollars that are going to help support our local small businesses here in our community. So I just wanted to name a few of those things and there are more. I mean, the unemployment extra $300 a week through March 14 is a very big assistance to folks who are unemployed right now. And so I named those things for 2 reasons. One, the foundation is keeping our eyes on those and then being able to pivot our resources depending on where federal dollars are going. And 2, I think I've heard a lot of people in the community say these just big old numbers coming from the feds and they're just printing checks and money. And I don't beg to know anything about any of that stuff. But what I do know is these dollars are helping our community. And I think it's important for people to kind of see and hear how those dollars are making it to the Holland Zeeland area, because it's a big help for a lot of people.
Mike, let me backtrack for a second. And when we were talking about the fact that the resources the foundation has been depleted from last year. And you talked about how benefactors stepped up to the plate in 2020 to help the foundation achieve some of the goals in helping people during the COVID-19 outbreak. Are you concerned that as you know, there's an initial rush? Oh, we got to help. The initial rush and the flush of people wanting to help right away. But now, we're talking 9 months into this, 10 months, it'll be 12 on next month. In fact, the novelty is gone. And the need still is there. And let's hope we can be able to have people step up and help the foundation, trying to help others in our community.
Yeah, it's a good question, Gary. I mean, I would say in general, there's probably some different forces pulling at that. So when you look at how much is given charitably over time, it usually has most to do with how the economy is doing. And right now, the economy is pretty bifurcated, right? We have many who are struggling mightily right now, but we also have others that are actually doing quite well. And in particular, those who have assets that are invested in the stock market, and the stock market continues to break record highs, which is just interesting. And some businesses, depending on their industry, are doing very, very well. And so I think in some ways I would say that's a force that would pull towards a positive upgrowth of charitable giving. What might pull towards the other direction is certainly, to your point, it's kind of, it's kind of catastrophe giving, right? It's the idea of like, we're going to respond really quickly in the moment, and then what happens over time. And you see that a lot of places. I think in this case, if I had to guess, I think people are seeing and feeling it enough that I think it will probably continue, maybe different than when you have a hurricane or something like that, where the giving comes right away and then people kind of move on. I think for many in our community, they're seeing this stuff. They're seeing the mental health struggles. They're seeing education and how that is going to take a while to bounce back. So my sense is that they're seeing the small businesses who are still kind of struggling. So my sense is that it will stay high, if I had to guess. And certainly 2020, was that. So I guess my guess would be that it's going to stay pretty high. I don't have too much worry about locally philanthropists not stepping up and continue to deliver. I think how we choose to deploy resources will be slightly different. I think that's appropriate. I think hopefully listeners heard in my message earlier, 2020 was responding to a different type of need and a different program for helping people than we've ever had before. It just was. I think 2021 will start to get back to a little bit more of, okay, what are some of those tried and true programs that we need to make sure that are super strong right now to help us through this time? And there will still be some new ones. I mean, I come back to the eviction diversion program, a good example. We didn't have a program like that in our community 3 years ago. And it will be arguably one of the biggest nonprofit undertakings, not only this year, but in a long time. I mean, Good Samaritan Ministries is going to be doing a program that is probably bigger than any one kind of social program in our community in a long, long time in 2021. So there's plenty of good work to be done that is kind of different and new. So there is definitely a need for support. The other area that I'll mention is that two other areas, if I can quickly. So one is, for many nonprofit organizations, they do use events to help fund their operating expenses, and events still aren't happening. So you still aren't doing kind of fundraising events. So I would encourage you folks out there, if you got some favorite nonprofits, just think about that, right? Can you support them and support their operations? Because that is a very meaningful way that a lot of nonprofits raise money. And so I'd hope people would consider that. The other area, Gary, that we funded meaningfully in 2020, and we're going to do another round announced here pretty quick, probably in February or in March when I come, we can talk about it, is there's still a lot of opportunity to make progress against racism and towards racial equity in our community. And I frame it as an opportunity for the reason that it's not that we haven't had this in our community before. It's just there's momentum in organizations and conversations that are happening that haven't happened in a while. And the foundation wants to be a part of helping make progress on that. So maybe that's a preview for March. When I come in March, we can talk a little bit more about that. But I just named that there are important things happening in 2021, and I think people see that. I'm encouraged by people stepping up, and the foundation is one of it. So thanks for featuring some of the stuff that we're doing, and we hope to partner with folks in the community to continue to do the best we can.
And of course, for the people who wish to help the Community Foundation of the Holland Zeeland area, the website is cfhz.org, and we'll put a link to that webpage when we put the podcast of our conversation with Mike Goorhouse up on our webpage at WHTC.com. In a little bit, it's a Zoom conversation as well. We'll also put a link to the video that Mike and I are shooting, as they say, as we speak. We'll put a link to that a little bit later on today, and you'll be able to see us working behind the curtain, as they say. Mike Goorhouse, president of the Community Foundation of the Holland Zeeland area, thank you very much for your time this morning on Talk of the Town and on a monthly basis. And we'll talk about some more things with the foundation in about a month or so. Mike, take care, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike Goorhouse on 99.7 and 1450 WHTC.